Hello and welcome back. Today I'm going to be addressing 5 real estate terms and explaining what they mean in the world of real estate. Before we get started, my name is Eleah Sims. I'm part of the Gateway Realty team here in Melfort, Saskatchewan. If you are looking for more information and tips related to buying and selling real estate, then make sure you subscribe to this channel. So for those of you watching this video, I'm going to assume that you know some things about real estate, or at the very least that you have an interest in following the real estate market. But just like every industry, there are terms and just jargon that is unfamiliar and sort of needs to be learned. So I wanted to start by making this video, and I'm only doing 5 terms today. So possibly there could be a part 2, just kind of moving on to more terms in the future. But for now, we're just going to look at 5 popular and terms that are just used often in real estate. So let's get started. Number 1 is MLS. So what MLS stands for is multiple listing service. All right, so the MLS is basically a database that is used by real estate brokers and agents to advertise a property that they have entered into a contractual agreement with a seller. So to post a listing on the MLS, you do have to be part of a real estate association. And so the purpose of the MLS is really to advertise a listing on there, and then also to offer compensation to other agents for selling that property. So they can see on the MLS what they would be compensated, or the amount of commissions that they would be receiving if they were to bring a buyer and purchase that property. So it's the real estate the listing brokerage that would actually be paying half of the commissions to the selling brokerage. So this is obviously very beneficial to sellers because there is incentive for these real estate agents to bring a buyer to sell that property because they're going to be getting commissions. And then of course you get way more exposure on your house when it's listed on the MLS. All right, so number 2 is limited dual agency. So simply put, limited dual agency is when a real estate brokerage and its agents represents both the seller and the buyer in a real estate transaction. Now, some of you may be asking, wait, how does that work? How can you represent both the seller and the buyer? How can you keep everything fair? And that's a great question to ask. So when limited dual agency begins, there is an agreement that both the seller and the buyer have to sign. So they're able to look and see on this agreement basically the duties that are owed to them and the other party during that transaction. So I'm just going to quickly touch on those because it'll give you a good understanding of how realtors kind of navigate this situation. So in this case, realtors cannot disclose what a buyer will pay for the house and what a seller will take for a price. So basically, you just have to kind of keep your lips sealed. You can't discuss those kind of details with either party. The real estate agent cannot disclose the motivation of the buyer to buy or the seller to sell. The real estate agent cannot disclose any personal or financial information about either party, and the real estate agent cannot represent the interest of the buyer over the seller or the seller over the buyer. So they have to keep everything completely fair. But the real estate agent does have to disclose any material defects that could affect a decision of either party. So these are the points that we go through with both parties so that they fully understand how the agreement works and how we're going to be representing them. So number 3 is days on market. So this is a term used to describe the number of days that a house has been listed on the MLS. So it's very common when you're showing a house for a buyer to ask how many days the house has been listed. So why is this number so important to buyers? So they're kind of probably looking to see how much negotiating power they have. So I'm sure you can understand that when a listing is first on the market, there can be an initial burst of interest. There's lots of showings, there's open house. You get a lot of just calls and interest on it right off the start. And the longer that the house is on the market, then that interest kind of starts to go down. And then the seller is kind of waiting for new buyers to enter the market, because all of the buyers that were currently looking have already seen it and obviously weren't interested, because probably 3 reasons. Either the price is too high, the condition of the property is maybe not very good, and maybe it's in a location that they don't like. So those are 3 main factors. But whatever the reason is, the longer that that house has been on the market, the harder it's going to be for a seller to get that initial asking price. Number 4 is PCDS. So this stands for Property Condition Disclosure Statement. So this is a form that is filled out by a seller when they list their property. So basically on this form, there are a list of more than 20 questions specific to their property that they have to answer. And what this does is it kind of gives the buyer or potential buyers an understanding of the history of the property and if there's been any issues with the property since those sellers have been in ownership. So some of the questions are referring to insulation in the home. Some of the questions are referring to water seepage, or if there's ever been a roof leak or mold in the property. So these are obviously all things that a buyer would like to know before they purchase a property. So when we show this form to our sellers, we ask them and tell them that they need to answer these questions honestly and to the best of their ability. So we are trusting that our sellers are being honest when they go through and fill out this form. All right, so number 5 is option clause. So I left this one last because it is a little bit more complicated, and I'm gonna do my best to explain it well. So when a seller receives an offer from the potential buyer, typically an appropriate condition date timeframe would be 2 weeks. So 2 weeks time to complete all of your conditions, whether that be home inspection, financing, whatever they are. Anything longer than 2 weeks time is usually when we would see an option clause attached to an offer. So the reason for this is because the seller does not want to be held in this contract for too long in case there's other interest in their house. So if they receive an offer with a longer condition date, they'll attach an option clause, and this allows the seller to be able to look at other offers during this time frame where the buyer is trying to satisfy these conditions. So now if during this time frame they receive another offer and they want to accept this other offer, maybe it's a better price, maybe it's a shorter time frame that it's all going to be firm and sold, then they have to give notice in writing to the first buyer, of a number of hours. So typically it's 48 hours or 72 hours, so 2 or 3 days time. And what that does is it allows that initial buyer that amount of time to remove all of their conditions and make the sale firm. And if they cannot do that, then it moves on to the next buyer. So because of the option clause that was attached and in place, the seller then reserves the right to move on to the second buyer, and they're no longer bound to that initial contract. So I hope that all makes sense. I want to ask you guys if you could please leave a comment below if there's any real estate terms or phrases or things that you've heard in the real estate world that you really don't understand and that you've wondered, I wonder what that means. I wonder how that works. I would be happy to add that into my next video. But that's it for today, you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.